Good morning.
Good morning.
I wish I got that kind of response at home when I say good morning. Welcome to our annual Lincoln Ideas Forum. My name is Callie Hawkins, and I'm the CEO and Executive Director of President Lincoln's Cottage. Whether you're joining us virtually or you're here in Lincoln's own drawing room, we're so glad that you've gathered with us for one of many signature programs that we've planned to commemorate America at 250. On April 13th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln visited the cottage for the final time. We do not know the content of the conversations that took place here that day, but we can imagine that thoughts of the future, of healing, of rebuilding, of what might come next, were never far from his mind. That visit occurred just one day before his assassination, marking this place as one of the last quiet thresholds between hope and loss. For more than a decade now, the Lincoln Ideas Forum has drawn together scholars and practitioners from across disciplines to give voice to ideas that connect history and the history of this place with the work that Lincoln carried out here, with ways his life and legacy continue to be understood today. The forum is really rooted in the belief that history is not static, that it speaks differently when we listen carefully and when we allow it to be in conversation with the present. Every day on tours of the cottage, we invite visitors to encounter a different side of Lincoln. Visitors meet a pragmatist and a politician, sure, but they also encounter a seeker, a president, a human being searching for deeper meaning amid immense turmoil. And he carved out time in an impossible schedule to sit beside wounded soldiers, to listen to the perspectives of his household staff, to walk among fresh graves as the cemetery just 200 yards from the front door filled with Union dead, and to speak with fellow mourners. He sang hymns with formerly enslaved people who had risked everything to claim freedom for themselves, bearing witness to both their suffering and their faith. Lincoln understood the profound value of listening to the voices of everyday people, of those who had been brutalized or forgotten, of those bereft by loss, and of those who remained against all odds, filled with hope. In some ways, he was himself one of those everyday Americans, the son of a poor farmer on the frontier, largely self-educated, acquainted early with grief, and marked by it throughout his entire life. From that vantage point, he recognized that wisdom and genius could emerge from any small hamlet in this country, and he believed deeply in the Union, even as he grasped its fragility. For Lincoln and for the nation during its gravest trial, the Declaration of Independence loomed large, not simply as a document of separation, but as a statement of enduring principle. Its assertion that all people are created equal set forth a moral vision, a promise not yet fully realized, but one that demanded ongoing effort, sacrifice, and recommitment. The Declaration offered a measure by which the nation could hold itself accountable, reminding Americans that the work of freedom was unfinished and the legitimacy of the Union rested on its ability to expand the meaning of equality and human dignity. It was from this understanding that Lincoln spoke during his last summer living at the cottage, when he addressed the 166th Ohio Regiment, saying, "I happen temporarily to occupy this big white house. I am a living witness that any one of your children may look to come here as my father's child has. It is in order that each one of you may have, through this free government which we have enjoyed, an open field and a fair chance for your industry, enterprise, and intelligence, that you may all have equal privileges in the race of life, with all its desirable human aspirations. It is for this the struggle should be maintained, that we may not lose our birthright. The nation is worth fighting for, to secure such an inestimable jewel. Today, we will hear bold visions for America as it approaches its 250th year, from a historian, a youth leader, a former refugee, and an incarcerated activist. Each speaker brings a distinct life experience and a unique way of understanding the world, reminding us that the American story has always been shaped by many voices. Our hope today is to inspire a reimagining of how we commemorate this milestone. Public excitement around America's 250th anniversary has waned, but we believe that by listening deeply to one another and by engaging perspectives different from our own, we can reignite a shared sense of possibility. Together, we can begin to see this anniversary not simply as an occasion to look back, but as an opportunity to envision and to build a brave and more just future. It's now my great honor to introduce our facilitator for today and my good friend, Andrea Jones. Andrea is a museum consultant, educator, and big picture thinker. She designs and facilitates learning experiences that enable people to widen their perspectives, learn about themselves, and connect with our common humanity. At the heart of her work are her values in action: empathy building, curiosity, and creativity. And as Andrea's friend, I can see this in not only her work, but in all of her relationships. Before consulting, Andrea served in several leadership positions within museums, including the Atlanta History Center, Accokeek Foundation, and Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum. A few of Andrea's favorite professional experiences include traveling to India to speak to His Holiness the Dalai Lama about the capacity of museums to foster compassion and empathy, co-founding Free the Museum, an initiative to help people to activate the museum experience in the world around us. Each year designing and facilitating the History Leadership Institute, which is a transformative program for developing human-centered leadership in the field of public history. You can find Andrea at her website, peakexperiencelab.com, to learn more about all of the wonderful work that she's contributed to our field. And for those of you who joined us last year for the forum, you may remember Andrea as our intrepid guide through fear itself. So please join me in welcoming Andrea Jones.
Thank you, Callie. Wow. This is always one of my favorite places to come, and as a museum consultant, I often point to Lincoln's Cottage as one of the places that really embraces relevance and responsiveness to the current moment, and that's exactly what this is. So, you have heard that this year marks America's 250th birthday, and it is a really momentous occasion, but also a daunting one. While most people are just out there living their lives, people like me, history museum professionals, we've actually been wringing our hands about 2026 for several years now. That's right, while people are changing jobs and having babies and making friends, we're all sitting around conference tables in our business casual attire talking about what the heck are we going to say to the public about, America? It is not the easiest thing, right? It's especially at this particular moment, talking about this, it's kind of like walking up to a miserable married couple on their 25th anniversary. They've been fighting for years, not listening to each other. We're kind of pissed. And you ask them, so 25 years, congratulations. What do you have to say to the world about the institution of marriage? Or better yet, what do you see for the future of your relationship? They'd probably be like, can you come back later? We're like kind of in the middle of something right now. And so yeah, America is kind of in the middle of something right now. And one thing that I've learned in doing this kind of work is that finding meaning in the 250th anniversary is a task that takes recognition that it's not all rainbows and lollipops, right? It can't all be celebration. We have to recognize that there has been hurt in America's past. There's pain even now. And there is even been gaslighting about whether the pain and the hurt is even real. But finding meaning in the 250th is also a task that requires us to muster up some future visioning and even some optimism, I believe. Because what I didn't tell you about our miserable married couple is that their union has actually produced 2 beautiful, bright, caring children. And they contain with them multitudes of possibility for the future. These kids, and actually all of America's kids, if we want to transcend this metaphor, deserve our best effort to dream up a better world. So we cannot focus only on the problems in our nation. And if we want our dreams to be more than platitudes, it requires a special kind of skill, I believe, that we can all start practicing in this room right now, today. And it is a practice, believe me. It is not a natural thing. Brené Brown calls it paradoxical thinking. It's the ability to hold tension between 2 opposite ideas. So, for example, the dysfunction of a marriage that produces beautiful, caring children, or a nation that values equality and maintains systems of oppression, and a recognition of past trauma with plenty of room for hope. So the idea is to continue to hold opposing ideas together until the sheer alchemy of these forces creates something new. Until it doesn't create anxiety or tension within you to consider them together. It just is. This is just the way it is. And if we can do that, then we can move past the debate about a single narrative towards a new creative vision that just incorporates it all. So today's speakers are going to help us work on our paradoxical thinking. That was a yes, we are. That's right. We're going to consider opposing ideas like finding freedoms while living behind bars, or centering joy within unjust systems, or being excluded and included as an immigrant, and imagining justice while also holding grief of past racial trauma. So, as you consider each new perspective, I invite you to make your vision of America even more full, more expansive, more tragic, and more hopeful than you had ever imagined before. Take it all in. So on a housekeeping note, I want everybody to understand, that we value the way that you learn. So if you need to get up, walk around in order to listen, that's fine. If you need to go to the bathroom, it's up the stairs. We're going to have 2 speakers for about 18 minutes each, and then we're going to do a short break, and then we'll have our last 2 speakers. I want to introduce our first speaker now. So our first speaker, Cadell, they call him Monty Kivett, is an incarcerated writer and curator who's going to be calling in from Franklin Correctional Center in North Carolina. So what a special guest to have. The United States has been, I don't know if you know this, this is a fact that I learned from a great museum, the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, that the United States has the most incarcerated people of any country on earth. It's not just because we have a high population, right? It is what we do here. That's 2 billion people in just the United States who are incarcerated. So in our system, mass incarceration is not a bug, it's a feature. And that is why Monty's perspective, I think, as a storyteller is very crucial in helping us to make sense of our nation's 250th anniversary and to hold injustice and freedom in paradox. And I think I hear, yeah, so is Monty going to?
He's going to take it from here.
Monty's going to take it from here, everybody. Okay, take it away, Monty.
Hi, thank you, Andrea. Thank you, and thank everyone for that warm welcome. I'm Cadell Kivett, and I'm joining you today from Franklin Correctional Center, the prison where I live in central North Carolina. Let me start by thanking President Lincoln's Cottage. Callie and her team here, Haley Bryant, Cameron Walpole, Rebecca Kilborn, and Joan Cummings. From my first interactions with the Cottage in 2022, Callie and her team have supported my ideas. They have collaborated to help me further develop my goals and to refine a mission. And they have really embraced me and the incarcerated communities whose voices I work to amplify. And so I'm ever so grateful that the Cottage lives up to its maxim as a home for brave ideas. Perhaps everything I've accomplished over the past handful of years has in some way hinged upon or benefited from my connection to and validation from the Cottage. So thank you so much. I'm deeply honored to be here with you today. And since Callie and Cameron extended this invitation a few months back, I have thought at length on what to speak about. And the theme of today's forum, A Vision for America at 250. I've watched prior years of this event, and I've read about the other speakers joining us today. And I've wondered, among these distinguished panels of academics and experts and heroes and innovators, what am I qualified to talk about? What could I
This call is from a North Carolina correctional facility.
and alongside these speakers to make your time and consideration worthwhile? And I return to one simple answer. The most important thing I could talk about is my own experience, and so that's what I'll talk about today. 5 years ago, I had an idea to use the visual artwork, drawings and paintings, along with writing, of people behind bars as a way to start new conversations about the justice systems in our country. I had been locked up at that point for more than a decade, and I had come to realize that conversations about prisons and punishment and justice and people on the inside often take place among academics and advocates, and sometimes among lawmakers, but they almost never included the voices and perspectives of incarcerated people themselves. And these conversations without us were almost always missing some critical element of truth. And then there's another scenario that's even worse than when these conversations miss the mark, and that's when there's no conversation at all. I thought if we could attract people to public spaces to see our creative work and then share with them our lived experience and get people on the outside, along with people behind bars, involved in conversations about justice and punishment, not only could we reframe the narrative for the average person in the free world, but we could also build some bridges that span the gap between free society and the insular world of prisons. And by way of these bridges, we could start to see the people behind bars and recognize them as individuals in their full humanity. But I also wanted people on the outside to learn what I had learned since coming to prison. I wasn't incarcerated until I was almost 40 years old. And like most people on the outside, I thought our justice systems and prisons functioned as advertised, to make our communities safer, to make victims of crime whole, to rehabilitate the salvageable, or to incapacitate the unredeemable. However, none of this turns out to be true. The truth is our criminal punishment systems offer little deterrence against crime, are ineffective at lowering crime rates, and often forget about victims soon after obtaining a conviction. They do little to rehabilitate those behind bars, and in 16 years of experience in prison, I have yet to meet a man who is wholly unredeemable. No human being is their very worst act, whether in prison or free. We have all committed harm and we are all capable of redemption. So in 2021, with just an idea, I started reaching out to people I had connected with through my work as an incarcerated journalist. I began pitching a proposal for an initiative that would become the collective Prison Reimagined. In 2024, our first exhibition, Prison Reimagined Presidential Portrait Project, launched here at the cottage. PRP3 was the first of its kind, a project fully conceived, organized, and curated entirely by incarcerated people. The exhibition featured original creative works by incarcerated people from across the country, and it was designed to walk visitors through the 56-year history of mass incarceration. So if you came in with no concept or understanding of how we ended up with 2 million people behind bars in our country, after seeing the exhibit, you would have a pretty good idea. But we also understood the profound significance of showing here at the cottage, bearing in mind that today's punishment systems are rooted in customs and traditions that existed before emancipation. Echoes of the old plantation resonate throughout today's prison industrial complex, and having our debut here at the cottage represented a critical connection to emancipation and abolition. Initially, we had planned just the one exhibit to be held here at this venue, but once we opened at the cottage, the response to the project was greater than we could have anticipated. People who had seen the exhibit asked where we were going next, and we received invitations to show in other cities. And I say we because Prison Reimagined by then had found some dedicated volunteers on the outside to help push the project forward. So we began exploring new venues to host the project. Through 2025, we traveled from DC to Virginia to Massachusetts, and this past October, we concluded our small tour at the Indy Art Center in Indianapolis. At each venue, we collaborated with local partners to bring programming to the hometown community, and we tried all sorts of things from speaker panels and Q&As to film screenings and book clubs. But most importantly, we started literal conversations that included justice-impacted people and people from each community. This year, as we celebrate and commemorate the semi-quincentennial, our newest project, Prison Reimagined, Complicated Independence 250, will take flight again here at the cottage. This project will take a look at the complicated intersections of some truly American traditions like liberty and slavery, emancipation and incarceration. And once again, we'll do this through the lens of artists and writers who are locked away in our nation's prisons. So in 2026, we're excited to begin another journey here at the cottage. But today, it's not just Prison Reimagined project I want to talk about.
This call is from a North Carolina correctional facility.
I want to change focus and tell you about my personal experience coming to prison and how what I've learned has led me to this work. We're building bridges, organizing exhibitions, and pushing for legislative change because I believe when people on the outside come to understand the things I've learned, they will agree that it's time for us to take a different approach when seeking justice and accountability. I'm currently serving a prison sentence of 80 years. I have hurt people in my life, and I'm not proud of this. But I do not wish to or seek to harm people, and I am not inherently or characteristically criminal or violent. And after 16 years in prison, I've come to understand that few people are. But I have been violent, and this is something that I once struggled with. But consider this, and I'm borrowing here from abolition organizer Miriam Kaba and from Danielle at Common Justice in New York. Consider that no one enters violence for the first time by committing it. No one's first exposure to violence is by committing a violent act. But I do believe that people who are harmed and suffer acts of violence deserve redress. They deserve to be made whole, or as close to that as they can be. And people who suffer violence at the hands of others deserve justice. And people who commit bad acts should be held accountable. But we've lost our way in America trying to achieve these subjective concepts by failing to center to center the people who are harmed, and instead by locking more and more people away with impossibly long prison sentences. So I'm hoping today that sharing my story will give you some insight from the margins as we contemplate and evaluate our young nation and a vision for moving forward at 250. So let me give you the bullet point version autobiography to provide a thorough and detailed view of my first 40 years of life. I was raised in North Carolina, the youngest of 5 children, and there was violence in our home, but I would consider the first 7 years of my life as average, very average, American, white, middle class. In 1978, my father ran for the North Carolina House of Representatives. He lost the election and thereafter left my mom and the marriage of 20 years. By 1980, with all my siblings out of the house, it was just me and my mom. And we had gone from a life of financial security to something that more resembled poverty and struggle. Between the 1st and 11th grades, I attended 10 different schools, 3 years of military school, a half year of private Christian school before I eventually dropped out and got my GED. And somehow, I made good grades. I spent time homeless as a teenager. I once lived on the Ringling Brothers circus train and toured the country. I worked in the tattoo industry for a handful of years. But throughout all this, for 26 years, I struggled, battling addiction and substance abuse, and this affected everything in my life. I've been married twice. I have 3 children, and it pains me to tell you, I have fallen short as a father. I spent 2 years in college studying media and history just before I was arrested in 2010, 3 months shy of my 40th birthday, and I've been locked up ever since. Among many difficulties, I've had some successes. A critical turning point in my life was achieving sobriety, and in less than a month, I'll mark 16 years of sustained and increasing clarity. So that's my life before incarceration. Before I can tell you the rest, I'm going to have to redial back in because of our limitations. And so I'm going to ask you to watch a short video clip from 2012 from Michelle Alexander, author of The New Jim Crow. Thank you.
Instead, the title of the book speaks for itself. I argue that today, in the so-called era of color blindness, and yes, even in the age of Obama, something akin to a caste system is alive and well in America. Mass incarceration of people of color is tantamount to a new caste system, one specifically designed to address the social, political, and economic challenges of our time. It's a system that shuttles children from decrepit, underfunded schools to brand new high-tech prisons. It's a system that locks poor people, overwhelmingly poor folks of color, into a permanent second-class status, eerily reminiscent of one we supposedly left behind. It is a system that is, in my view, the moral equivalent of Jim Crow. Now, I have to admit that there was a time when I rejected this kind of talk. There was a time when I resisted comparisons between mass incarceration and slavery, or mass incarceration and Jim Crow, believing those kinds of claims and those kinds of comparisons were exaggerations, were distortions, were hyperbole. In fact, there was a time when I thought that people who made those kinds of claims and those kinds of comparisons were actually doing more harm than good to efforts to reform our criminal justice system and achieve greater racial equality in the United States. But what a difference a decade makes. For after years of working as a civil rights lawyer, representing victims of racial profiling and police brutality, and investigating patterns of drug law enforcement in poor communities of color, and attempting to assist people released from prison re-enter into a society that had never shown much use for them in the first place, I had a series of experiences that began what I now call my awakening. I began to awaken to a racial reality that is just so obvious to me now that what seems odd in retrospect is that I had managed to be blind to it for so long.
I'm back. So my personal decade of difference started about the same time Professor Alexander gave that presentation. And from a completely different side of the justice system, I experienced my own awakening. In 2012, after 2 years in county jail, I arrived at Central Prison, North Carolina's flagship prison. When you first come to prison, you're in survival mode, experiencing culture shock. You're just finding your bearings and taking in surroundings. Prison, after all, is a dangerous place. But I became acclimated and developed a rapport with the people who lived and worked there. I got a job as a librarian, and I learned to avoid trouble. Central Prison today is just as it was in 2012.
This call is from a North Carolina correctional facility.
It is a sprawling complex of buildings that weren't planned together, but built side by side over the years, interconnected by tunnels. And as part of this complex, there is an old warehouse building called the Tag Plant. We call it the Tag Plant because for 74 years, it was the home of North Carolina's license plate production, or tags, as we call them. The building also housed at one time a printing facility and a plant that makes road signs. And as you'll see, North Carolina prisons have a long-standing historical connection to our roadways. But it was in the Tag Plant, which by 2012 had become a storage warehouse, where among pallets of old machine parts and dusty office equipment and a stack of worn papers, I found a 1927 copy of the Prison News. And as a history student, I was enthralled. Within the pages were stories you might see in an old prison movie, like the story about Caledonia Farms baseball teams playing games against local challengers, or one about a boxing contest at CP in which the prison's champion mauler would be trained by the former heavyweight champ of the Allies. There was a story about a new building going up at Caledonia Farm, a real modern structure, it said, sleeping quarters so fine that some of the boys will imagine they're in a hotel and be sending home for silk pajamas. But there were also stories that reminded you of the South's complicated history and the dark origins of our prisons. Stories of young men sent away for hard labor on work farms and railroads, and others about the all-Negro camps hired out to private contractors, reminders of the deadly and dehumanizing convict lease system once ubiquitous across the South. And it was at this time I started to think about those who had endured these prisons before me, and I wondered, for how long had this existed and why? After 2.5 years at Central Prison, I was chained and shackled and loaded onto an old bus and transferred to Caledonia Prison Farm, the place I had read about. It was a long drive, a great distance through farm country, seeing little more than countryside for hours. Passing field after field, you eventually turn down Caledonia Drive, which several miles later will dead end into the prison itself, and you realize you've been on the prison work farm for nearly 10 minutes already. I entered Unit 1, built around 1990. I walked through the building and out and exit on the back side and immediately entered Unit 2. At that moment, when I stepped into the building, I felt as if transported back in time. Once again, I was in the mind of a prison movie, but now I was living it. Steel bars stretched to the ceiling to meet exposed plumbing. Giant porcelain sinks resembled animal watering troughs. At that moment, I realized I was in the new building I had read about in that old issue of the Prison News. Now 90 years old, the dorm is dilapidated, insect and rodent infested, yet still in use. It was no silk pajama-worthy hotel. So if the old Prison News had me thinking about the history of prisons, shipping to Caledonia pushed me over an edge. I knew there was more to the story, and I wanted to know. So I called a friend who worked at Guilford College in Greensboro, and I told him where I was, and I asked him to send me a history of the place. He sent me an academic paper written by Elijah Gaddis, a grad student at Chapel Hill, and when I read the text, it confirmed what I already knew in my gut. Caledonia Prison Farm had once been Caledonia Plantation, where there had been as many as 271 enslaved people. This was a tipping point for me. I had come to a new realization. I had learned something that felt critical to share with others, but as I would find out, there was much more to learn. Immediately following the Civil War, North Carolina took steps to harness the labor of newly emancipated people. In the 1866 legislative session, a law was passed. Convicted people, even those convicted of petty crimes, could be sentenced to work on chain gangs on the public roads and railroads. But in 1866, there was not yet a state-run prison system. Counties managed their own convicts, but soon the state of North Carolina would control this labor. As part of the new 1868 Constitution, the state directed the legislature at its first meeting to fund the building of a state central prison. At the same time, the state adopted the exception clause for slavery. Leaders were not only establishing a prison system, they were preparing for long-term control of compelled labor. The new state convicts, most of them, would be black. By 1870, a log structure was built on the site that would become Central Prison. That first year, 241 men and women were incarcerated there, and they began the process of building the state penitentiary. The next year, another 188 would come through to work, and this would continue for more than a decade. As sections of the prison were completed, convicts filled the beds. And I want to note here that in
This call is from a North Carolina correctional facility.
6 years into the construction of North Carolina's Central Prison, we observed as a nation our centennial at such a complicated time of reconstruction. And I can only imagine that in the minds of the emancipated and poor Southerners and those on the margins that our future must have felt uncertain. By 1884, the massive brick structure was finished and occupied, but most of the incarcerated people were already leased out to the railroads and county road projects. The transition from plantations to prisons was immediate and fluid, and much of the culture, tradition, and even language has endured across 151 years. Frederick Douglass, perhaps, understood best what was happening. Slavery, he said, had been fruitful at giving itself names, and you and I and all of us better wait and see what new form this old monster will assume, in what new skin this old snake will come forth. After emancipation, slave codes, which restricted the movement, possessions, and the being of enslaved people, turned to black codes, and then to Jim Crow. Racial equality in our country, specifically and especially when it comes to justice, is something we have still not achieved. I left Caledonia and transferred to a third prison, Nash Correctional, and there I became part of the Nash News, a magazine conceived and produced by incarcerated people. And through the Nash News, I found a way to start sharing the truth about the inside with people on the outside. Still, our punishments have evolved over the centuries, but many endured long past their due. Branding on the cheek and on the hands, cutting off the ears, having an ear nailed to the pillory, or being whipped publicly were all legal punishments, which have been discontinued by the time of Reconstruction, that is, except one, whipping with a leather strap. The word chastise is used in old slave law to describe horrible beatings at the hands of enslavers, but on the roads of North Carolina, flogging was used to compel those who wouldn't work. In 1914, a supervisor and a guard of a county road camp were convicted of assault for the beating of one Dan Gallagher, a man sentenced to road work. They had whipped Gallagher with a leather strap, 16 inches long, 3.5 inches wide, with a 5-inch wooden handle. And the prisoner Gallagher died after the beating. But the local doctor said the flogging had not contributed to his death, and the men were only convicted of assault. But they appealed to the North Carolina Supreme Court, and despite testimony that chastisement with a leather strap had been used for more than a generation, the court upheld the conviction. The supervisor and guard were both issued a fine of $10. In 1916, another road camp guard by the name of Mincher was ordered to take Junius Potter, a camp prisoner, away from the other workers and give him 5 or 6 licks. Mincher, a large man of 240 pounds, instead made Potter take his pants down in front of the whole work detail, and lying on the ground, he had a man hold Potter's head, another hold his legs, and a third to hold his feet, while he administered 15 to 20 lashes. Potter worked the remainder of the day, but he needed the care of a doctor that night. The doctor examined him and said he could find no bruises. At trial, another prisoner testified against Mincher. He said that he had seen Mincher whip more than 130 people over 6 months, including a woman, each time administering 25 to 50 lashes. One man had died, he said. The court believed the witness and sentenced Mincher to 12 months in the county jail, specifically not to be worked on the county roads. Mincher was white. The North Carolina Supreme Court said that flogging in these cases would be legal if a regulation were only established at the county level. Justice Allen noted, if the convict system of working the roads is to be maintained, some kind of punishment must be inflicted in order to compel the unruly convict to work. If this cannot be done, the system may as well be abolished. By 1917, the state prison system established a policy that allowed for flogging of certain prisoners, but only in the presence of a doctor or a chaplain. For nearly half a century, road camps and railroad camps used mobile living carts throughout the South. In the 1930s, North Carolina established some 60 permanent road camps, and in the early 40s, discontinued the use of the mobile wagons, thank God. Nearly 100 years after emancipation, North Carolina finally made it clear by law corporal punishment of prisoners is illegal. But still, road gangs worked in North Carolina until 1970. 2 years ago, I arrived at my 4th camp, Franklin Correctional. Established in 1939 as one of the 60 permanent road camps, but men here no longer work the public roads. However, in 1987, an industrial sign plant was built here where incarcerated people make street and highway signs. Each worker gets paid
You have 60 seconds remaining.
from 26 to 36 cents per hour. Today's forum asks for our vision of America at 250, but to understand the vision, you must consider the lens through which we view, and I view everything, politics, justice, social norms, humanity, through the lens of how it affects our carceral state. Our past and our present are forever intertwined and necessary to understand one with the other. My vision
You have 30 seconds remaining.
My vision cannot be one for America at 250, for I see where we are and we have not yet arrived, but I am hopeful. I'm going to skip a part and tell you that Angela Y. Davis tells us you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. And so I say, as we continue forward, let's try something new, and I suggest mass decarceration. And thank
I think he said mass decarceration. Wow. Let's workshop that, shall we? Wow, that was powerful. You know, when Monty started and got on the phone, I didn't get you give a chance to read his full bio because I was afraid that the phone was gonna, you know, we needed to take advantage of the time. As you can see, it's timed like to the minute. But some of the stuff in his bio that really interested me was the transformation that he made from being a civilian free person to this new identity as an activist, as a storyteller. You know, he's really been transformed by the experience in a way. And, you know, as you can tell, he's not just talking about his own experience, he's becoming a voice for many, many others. And so you get this perspective that you don't normally get from the outside, right? And it made me think about when he was talking about, you know, the bridges that we build between the outside and the inside, and that the prison system was not working as advertised. And I thought, well, where's the advertisement? Where are we getting that from? And I immediately thought about my own 8-year-old who a couple years ago asked for a Playmobil prison set, you know, for Christmas. You know, after having seen it in the catalog, where you get to play, you know, prison. And so, I mean, that's the advertisement, right? Like all of those, and I invite you to think about where those ideas about prison and incarceration and the justice system come for you, because that's the start of kind of breaking this down. So, really, really thankful for Monty. What a great relationship you all have. So, we'll go on to our next speaker. So listening to our next speaker, Angelina Johnson, is actually an opportunity for us to see America's future up close. Angelina is a young social justice advocate whose resume is literally already longer than mine. She's going to offer her vision of centering joy as a political act within systems that don't give us enough space for this important emotion. I'll just read you a little bit about her bio. She's an advocate dedicated to supporting survivors of power-based violence and promoting well-being for all. She is currently a fellow at the Weil Legal Innovators Program, serving as program associate for the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund Legal Network for Gender Equity at the National Women's Law Center. Whoa, that is a lot of words. Doing good work for for gender, for social justice, and in the legal profession. She will begin law school at University of Texas Law School in August. And Angelina is also a member of Made by Us, Youth 250 Bureau, which is an advisory board of 100 young adults working on amplifying youth voices in initiatives for the 250th anniversary of the United States. So how appropriate that you're here. Angelina's previous professional experiences include positions at the University of North Texas and End Rape on campus. Angelina graduated from Fordham University in 2024 with a Master's of Social Work, from the Louisiana State University in 2022 with a BA in English and a BS in psychology. You just have to keep adding the degrees. As an undergraduate, Angelina founded her school's first student-led movement against sexual assault and served on Louisiana's statewide power-based violence review panel. In her free time, she can be found practicing yoga. Good, I'm so glad. And going on hikes with her German Shepherd Husky mix. Please welcome Angelina Johnson.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Angelina. Thank you so much, Andrea. That was an incredibly kind bio. Before I get started, I just want to say thank you to Callie and Cameron and to all the Lincoln Cottage staff for having us here today. Thank you to the other presenters for your vulnerabilities and your ideas. I am so impressed and thoughtful and reflecting on everything Monty just shared. And I want to say thank you to all of you for being a part of this moment, for cultivating this space where we can be comfortable sharing these ideas. So this is going to make me sound like a very stereotypical young person, but I have a complicated relationship with America. I honestly think that any true patriot does. My relationship with the US is as tense and multifaceted as a relationship between a parent and a teenager, which I think is a rather good analogy. I am the teenager in this scenario, finding it super easy to critique my country's past, to say, why would you do that, to point out all of her flaws. And the US can sometimes feel like my overbearing parent, telling me who and how I should be, how to present myself, how to love. And yet, despite all of these complexities, despite all of this tension, I love my country dearly. Even on days where all I can think about are her failures, I find I have deep love for these United States. Now, Andrea told you a little bit about me, but I am ranting at you about my thoughts on patriotism without telling you much about myself. So, like I said, I'm Angelina. I use she, her pronouns. I am 24 years old. I am a social worker, soon to be a law student. Please send me your best wishes, your thoughts, your prayers, please. I'm currently working at the National Women's Law Center. I am the daughter of a Dominican immigrant. My mom moved here in the 90s just before marrying my dad. She was a 90-Day Fiancé before it was a show. I was born and raised just outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And then, like Andrea mentioned, I love yoga. We got it? Yes. I love to box. I love to spend time with my husband and my dog. And then I'm also a member of this great organization called the National Youth 250 Bureau, which is a group of young adults working with museums and cultural institutions to make programming more accessible to young people ahead of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which Monty mentioned is also called the semi-quincentennial, and I just really love saying that word. So speaking of the semi-quincentennial, let's go back to patriotism. A little over 2 months ago, I sat in the National Constitution Center with some of my peers from Youth 250, watching some people give their letters to America. Through song and dance, spoken word, and graphic design, young people made bold appeals to our nation. They were asked to value the rights of the marginalized, to stand up for women, people of color, LGBTQ+ people. They were asked to do something, anything, about climate change so that our generation can have a healthy future. Asked to protect our history, to say the truth of our history, not to hide it. Truly, the list of issues my generation can identify with this country is endless. And even though we reflected on some of the darkest corners of our country that day, I left Philadelphia with an overwhelming sense of joy. Yes, we have a lot of problems. And yes, my generation is not going to be able to fix them all. Many before us have tried and have done incredible work, and yet these issues persist on. But to be in that space with other young people, to see young people given a platform to cast vision for the nation, how could I not feel joy? When was the last time you felt true, all-consuming joy? I've shared a moment with you. I would invite you to think about a moment of your own in your head. And when you have that moment in mind, I want you to ask yourself, was I rushed? Was I distracted? Was my joy inundated by something? Was I able to fully only feel joy? Would you recognize joy if you were to feel it wholly? On her 250th birthday and beyond, the United States desperately needs to center joy. We in this room need to center joy. We have long faced a joy deficit. We are too overworked, too exhausted, too distracted by our technology to fully feel joy. And this is extremely dangerous. When we fail to recognize that joy is a powerful political tool, we fall into traps that force us to continue systems of oppression instead of fighting for the founding principles of our founding documents. And hear me, I am not talking about happiness. I mean, Jefferson basically enshrined that in the Declaration as fleeting. I'm talking about joy. Joy is lasting. Joy is personal. It is spiritual. It is familial. Joy is a liberated sense of contentment. A joyful person feels pain, of course, but they process that pain to deepen their admiration for life. And I know it might feel silly that I am suggesting joy as a vehicle for political and social change. I know that casting vision for a nation is a serious endeavor, that governing is a serious matter. Trust me, as I'm preparing for law school, I know that our legal scholars are not writing with joy in mind. In fact, they're writing with torture in mind for me in the future. Our politicians are not running campaigns centered around joy, but they should be, because joy is not trivial. I personally strive each day to be a more joy-centered person. And being joy-centered means promoting my own joy, but also promoting joy in the lives of others. Being a joy-centered person motivates me to fight for social justice causes. because I recognize that joy and oppression are incompatible. I recognize that someone cannot be a joyful person if they are hungry, hopeless, incarcerated, pushed to the margins. And I can't be truly joyful knowing that my neighbors are suffering in these ways. If that's where centering joy in my personal life has brought me, can you imagine what a country centered on joy would look like? A United States of America centered on joy would be a vastly different political landscape. We'd have universal health care, student loan forgiveness, guaranteed rights to bodily autonomy, strong civil rights protections, protections from gun violence. I can go on and on and on. A United States of America centered on joy wouldn't only merit new policies, but it would merit vast social change. We would recognize that we can't experience joy without one another. We would become a collectivist society instead of hyperly individualistic. Ultimately, a nation centered on joy does whatever it takes to guarantee that every American truly has life, liberty, and an opportunity to pursue happiness. So where do we start? I want to be extremely clear that it is wrong to believe that all the barriers to feeling joy are internal. The power distributions that have existed long before our country was even founded have removed joy from the American way of life. But we do have to start with what's in our own power, and that often means looking within yourself. What can you do to better center joy in your life? Where can you resist capitalism to breathe, to rest, relax? How can you better connect with people? Do you need to work out some things in your past so that you can experience joy fully? This is a PSA to please go to therapy if you have the means. And if you already feel like you are centering joy in your own life, that's incredible. I am so proud of you. I would then ask you, how can you fight for the joy in your community, in your country? How can you start being an ambassador for joy everywhere you go? I have personally gone through this process. I am still going through this process because honestly, the work is never really done. A key part to being a joyful person is to be authentic. And authenticity is something that I'm honestly not really great at. I struggle with authenticity. It's hard to be authentic when it feels like society is trying to push you into boxes that your identity transcends. When America tends to reject nuance and instead prefer to make sweeping assumptions about people, it's hard to be fully yourself when you live with complex intersecting identities. This was exacerbated by growing up in the golden age of social media. As a young person, not only was I worried about creating a perfect presence when I was in person, but I was worried about cultivating an online presence that would make me more loved. I wanted to appear to share all of myself online, but not actually share anything because I didn't want to be judged by my peers. So by the time I was a teenager, I was a master at altering my personality. And to be clear, I was not doing this consciously. It was natural. When I was at school with my high school feminist club, we were called the Fighting Gender Inequality Club because we weren't allowed to say feminist. Or when I was there at that feminist club, I was proud, audacious, bold. I was politically informed. But whenever I was at home or at church, I was more quiet, more withdrawn, just willing to do whatever someone asked of me. And all of these years of camouflaging made me end up feeling like I didn't know who I truly was. Like I wasn't anything at all. I couldn't be joyful being Angelina. I didn't know her. Thankfully, in my early 20s, which I guess I still am, but in my earlier 20s, I found a really great therapist who helped me work through some of these complex feelings I was having. Now, I have chosen to be radically all of me all the time. And this has exponentially increased my capacity for joy. I have found that there are people in my life who love and celebrate my intersectional identities. And those who don't, I'm able to set boundaries with. Every day, I am getting better and better at walking away from spaces that do not accept me for who I am and walking into those that do. I am living life with a level of visibility and inclusion that I honestly didn't think it was possible when I was a teenager. And not only has that made me more joyful, but it's made me a better advocate. It's given me more empathy, more recognition for how identity and the pressure to label oneself may have impacted other people's lives. I am better able to fight for the joy of my neighbor because I fought for my own joy. And so while America desperately needs to let go of the labels we try to stick onto people, we cannot ignore identity. We cannot pretend that we have homogenous experiences. And though many are trying, we cannot pretend that identity doesn't need to be in the discussion when analyzing who has power in this country. It is ridiculous to try and shape a government that does not reflect the seen and unseen identities of the constituency. A joyful America gives power to people who have been marginalized. A joyful America values diversity and equity and inclusion. A joyful America considers those most impacted by a situation to be the experts in that moment. It is really strange being a civically minded young adult in this country. I am so energized, so full of ideas for what I want my country to be. And my peers are too. Like I shared in the beginning, I find so much joy being in community with other young people. And yet I get discouraged when I think about how little power we have. Gen Z and millennials make up 40% of the US population. I don't think I need to tell you that we don't hold 40% of elected office. Nor do we hold 40% of the economic power in this country. And no, it's not because we spend all our money on avocado toast and iced lattes. It's because we have a system designed to keep the powerful powerful and to keep up-and-comers from opportunities. Despite this, I have had the immense privilege of being consulted at times on the issues impacting my generation and my communities. One of the most impactful of these experiences happened when I was in college. My school was receiving national media attention for failures to comply with Title IX. Specifically, university employees had been covering up student stories of experiencing sexual assault to protect the school's interest. Now, a few months before this happened, some friends and I had founded our school's first student-led initiative against sexual violence. So suddenly, less than 6 months after starting this group, we had all these state legislators and reporters from big media outlets wanting to speak to us. Now, thankfully, we did have those legislators because our school was not listening. And those legislators wanted our ideas for bills they might introduce in order to ensure this didn't happen again in Louisiana. After many months of collaboration and lobbying, we did get a few laws passed. A law was passed to create a state-level review panel to give universities more accountability to make sure they're doing what they need to do. A panel that, as Andrea mentioned, I later had the honor of serving on. A law was passed as the first legislative act that session to give survivors the right to break their lease early if they experienced sexual violence in the property they were renting. Something that seemed like common sense to me and my friends had not been on the books in Louisiana. Another law was passed to require that if university employees conceal stories of sexual violence, they must be terminated from employment, to bring more accountability, to better guarantee that what happened at our school wouldn't happen again in the future. And the impact of this has gone far beyond my friends and I. The entire state is more trauma-informed, more joy-centered, because a few people in power took the time to realize that they were not the experts in that moment. When we recognize identity as central to solving any problem, we better guarantee a joyful future for ourselves and for our communities. Diversity is the beauty of the United States. Liberty and freedom are only possible when we recognize and value diverse identities. A commitment to centering joy will always drive us to a commitment to identity and to empowering the marginalized. That is key to centering joy. And that is why joy is inherently political. When communities are suffering under the unending weight of intentional oppression, to be joyful in that moment is protest. When kids are being bullied by their government for being gay or transgender, to radically accept and love them is resistance. When programs are being cut that are designed to empower the most needy in this country, treating our unhoused neighbors with dignity is fighting back. When people are violently attacked for their religious beliefs, showing up to your place of worship or being proudly committed to not having one is power. And when the Supreme Court rules that ICE can racially profile and target us for speaking the languages of our ancestors, seguir hablando en esos idiomas es una forma de disidencia. When they want us to be worn out, we will continue to laugh and to play and to love, using our joy as a tool in the fight to build the nation that we all deserve. And as we wield the power of our joy, we will become better activists, better neighbors, better partners, better friends, better family members. We will go to the polls with clearer eyes, thinking, what candidates are going to promote joy in my community? We will let empathy be our guiding light. We will better recognize the humanity that lives within each of us. So I implore you, let joy be your source and your motivation, but let it also be your battle cry. Because in everything you do after you leave here today, you will be shaping the next 250 years of our nation. And as you learn to center joy, you will find that you must be in certain fights. Centering joy will not let you sit on the sidelines as people are being oppressed. Maybe you'll dig down deeper into the fights you're already in. Maybe you'll find that some of the things I've identified as important to me resonate with you. Maybe it'll be different. You don't have to define today what centering joy means in your life. But I would challenge you, take one step in the next week to better center joy. Maybe it means journaling, maybe it means calling a loved one, baking some treats for a neighbor, or maybe it means going to a protest, signing a petition, talking about unionizing in your workplace. I can't say where centering joy will bring you, but I can promise you it will make our country a better place. I can tell you this country will never be what it ought to be if we don't start to get serious about joy. So before I step down for the day, I want to remind you to remember your power. Remember that every time you smile, laugh, or hold out a hand, you are fighting oppressive systems, and that is the most patriotic thing you can do. Joy is the key to America's next 250 years. Joy is the American dream. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, you've seen the future. That's right. We're centering joy, and I love that you gave us specific things that we could do. I wonder, I study values a lot in my profession, and I have often understood joy to be falling under the category of a broader value called hedonism.
Yes.
Right? And to some people, especially, their religions have taught them that joy is actually something you don't have like it's a sin to feel joy for joy's sake. Do you think that is a barrier, or do you think that's part of our problem, is that we need to kind of give ourselves permission to feel it, and that it's okay to not do our to-do list or break our backs?
Yeah, of course. I think there's barriers, like you mentioned, spiritual barriers, there's economic barriers, there's things that we're just taught are normal. And I think specifically in the US, we haven't been taught that it's normal to do anything just for pleasure. Most people, you have a hobby and then the hobby turns into a side hustle, right? And
Yeah.
we can just do things because they're fun, because they bring us joy. And
Yeah.
I do think that's definitely a barrier.
You know what song was going through my head when I was, and Omar, I'm going to rely on you because, Gen X DJ that you are. Do you remember the song by Rob Bass, Joy and Pain? Joy and pain, sunshine and rain. I was not doing it justice, but it reminded me of that paradox too, that we're holding both of these things together, and that I appreciate that. Okay, so we are going to have a 5-minute break and stretch your legs, go to the bathroom, and I will see you. See, it is 11:09, so 5 minutes. See you soon. some really good hand raisers. I see some excellent hand raisers. We are getting ready to start. Okay.
No way.
All right. You know what? It's too joyful in here, y'all. You know, that's the problem. But I mean, I love it. Everybody's connecting. I think that's one of your vision for 250, right? The people, the connecting. Excellent. Thank you for letting me use my field trip skills. Okay, so our next speaker is Zarmeena Hamidi, and she is an Afghan-American actress, advocate, and cultural voice whose journey reflects the promise and complexity of the American story. Born in Kandahar, raised as a refugee, she immigrated to the United States as a child and grew up in Virginia, where she built a life centered on family, education, and community. Her path to acting began unexpectedly in her 40s. Let's see, there's a narrative hook here. When she earned her first role on the CBS series United States of AI. Oh, Al, sorry. You know what? You can.
It happens all the time.
You know what? There's another series that is AI, and it's. I'm just kidding. As one of the first Afghan-American women to portray an Afghan mother on mainstream American television, she brought authenticity, language, and lived experience to a national audience. Her presence on screen marked a meaningful step towards broader representation of Afghan and immigrant narratives in American media. Today, Zarmeena reflects on the nation through the lens of someone who has lived both displacement and opportunity. She speaks openly about the resilience of immigrants, the responsibility of storytelling, and her hope for the future where belonging is not conditional but celebrated. Her vision for America's next chapter centers on empathy, cultural understanding, and the belief that newcomers continue to shape the country's identity in powerful ways. Please welcome Zarmeena Hamidi.
Good morning, everyone. I don't know if it's morning or afternoon. Morning. Morning, and after Monty's and Angelina's talk, I don't know if I could match your eloquence and Monty's story. I think, again, as human beings, we're all different, and every single person brings to the table a new experience, and everyone's amazing. And thank you, Lincoln Cottage, and Cameron and Callie and everyone else for giving me this opportunity to speak today. Let's see, I kind of had to reshape my thought process after hearing our wonderful speakers, just because sometimes we plan one thing, but then we gain that experience from others around us, and it kind of shapes our thinking as well, and that's what I've been doing all my life. So I just wanted to start off with a really small, short story. A white American couple approached us after our event ended. The male looked shocked, and the female cried. She cried because she came to our event that we held in the library called Meet Your Muslim Neighbor. And she cried because she said, I came here to give you a piece of my mind, and I'm leaving with a whole lot more than what I came. And when she said she's giving us a piece of her mind, they were not nice words, but she left choosing not to use those words because we were Muslim. And this event, my husband and I and our children together in our community collectively organized in 2015, December of 2015. And that was the time when a series of events had happened. I don't think anybody's a stranger to the way the Muslim community is portrayed in the media. And it's been prior to 9/11, but things just intensified after 9/11. The Muslim story is not necessarily a good one that we see in the media these days. 2015, I believe it was the beginning that Charlie Hebdo shootings happened in France. In July, I believe in July, Donald Trump decided to, he announced his campaign, and one of the main topics of his campaign was his anti-immigration laws. And with those anti-immigration rhetoric came a lot of anti-Muslim rhetoric. And keep in mind that Syria was going through their civil war around that time, and the United States was taking in Syrian refugees. And so there was a lot of anti-immigration talk. There was a lot of talk around the the Muslim ban was also, circulated around the campaign. And this, in return, kind of catalyzed a lot of hate rhetoric among the normal people like us. I grew up in Arlington County, and most of my life, almost 40 years of my life, I have been an American, grew up here in Arlington. I'll share that more later. But to hear my neighbors speak up against Muslims, and these, I live in Loudoun County, and I lived in Ashburn at that time, and I'm raising children. I'm a mom with 3 children, and at that time they were young. For me to hear such anti-Muslim words coming from potentially my neighbors, and we're part of a social media group. Don't laugh at this. It was called the Real Housewives of Loudoun County. But it became real issues, not what you see on the TV, but actual issues that all of us went through. And this page right now, I believe we're more than 30,000 women on this page, members of Loudoun County females. And so for me to read such comments coming from other mothers, other possible women that I come across in the supermarket or wherever, at a coffee shops, it alarmed me because for selfish reasons, obviously, because I did not want my children to become victims of any abusive language that was going to become, be a part of this fabric right now in Loudoun County. I grew up thinking that we are very, very well united and very well accepted. I myself personally, and that's another story that I'll share later, but I just never thought my children would be hearing something like this, or I would be hearing like that, which in turn would affect my children and the children of many, many, many other Muslims living in Loudoun County. So that is why we decided, I decided to, first of all, send out a message to this group of, I think then it was like 20,000, maybe 15,000 women, offering to meet them. I said, come meet me. I would love to sit with you at a coffee shop and get to know me, and I'll get to know you. So what you hear in the media may not necessarily be true, because come, I'll tell you what a Muslim is and what we believe in. And to your surprise, maybe, and to mine, we will find a whole lot of commonalities versus the differences that we read about, that we see on TV. It was just a very, very simple message that I sent out, and I did not expect any response. If anything, I expected a whole lot of negativity. But I ended up getting over 300 responses of women willing to come out and thanking me for posting this because they wanted to learn. And that's when I learned that, a lot of us are just misinformed, and that, we are willing to go and meet as a human being, as person to get to learn, about one another. Because of that, we were like, okay, I can't possibly have any days over 300, women to meet with them in coffee shops every single day. I have a family to raise. So yes, we planned the event at a local library, and we had over 90 people attend. And in this event, what we did was I had a local imam who taught about the basics of our, Islamic belief. And then I had a female lawyer born and raised in the United States. I believe she went to school in Texas, but she was an attorney and a wonderful one. And, she wore the hijab. And I talked to her and I was like, I'm choosing you for a purpose. It's because you're female, you're Muslim, you're born and raised here, you're educated, and don't take me the wrong way, but you're a hijabi, and I'm purposely choosing you to come and speak because the hijab has been a representation of oppression within the media, and I'm sure we've all seen it. So she was happy, she came, she shared her story, our imam shared the basics of the Islamic faith, and then here I was, a refugee from Afghanistan, and I shared my story of how I came to the United States as a 9-year-old and where I am today. And at that time, I wasn't acting. I hadn't started my acting career then. But through these 3-4 people that were there and sharing our stories, in return, we had that one couple who came up to us where the wife was in tears, and she said, I came here with one thought process, but I'm leaving with so much more. And she asked to take a copy of our Quran, which is our holy book, not because we wanted to convert anyone, but because it is a great way to educate yourself, take that scripture, meet a Muslim, whatever it means to educate yourself about a people that are different than you. So that was the whole story behind why we were approached by that couple. And I started that because we came from completely different backgrounds, but we connected as human beings from different backgrounds, and that connection has stayed. Now I'll go into telling you a little bit about myself. I came to the United States with my family in 1988. It was February. It was a cold, rainy day. I guess we were at Ellis Island first because that's where the flights used to come. I think they still do. And then we were brought to the DC area. I was 9 years old, completely unaware of what the United States looks like. In my little small child head, when we were in Afghanistan, Pakistan growing up, I thought of the United States as a place like out of space, kind of. Like my imagination was, I didn't think of the United States as a place with trees and like normal people. I'm sorry, it's a 9-year-old and below brain thinking. We came February, it was at nighttime. The next day I woke up, I looked around, it was a normal, very normal place. There was grass, there were trees, there were people speaking. I mean, obviously my uncle, we were staying with him initially, so we spoke the language, but I realized the United States is a very normal place, like back home. I consider myself a 2-time refugee. So Afghanistan was invaded by Soviet Union back in 1978. That's the year I was born. My father, he was working for the government at the time, and he was given 2 options. You either join the communist movement or you're going to be jailed. So we had to escape in the middle of the night. In 1981, we escaped to Pakistan. We're from Kandahar, so with the south, and Quetta, Pakistan was the closest city to us. So we did that escape. Pakistan was, although I was a child, as a child, when you flee a conflict, you don't experience what the adults feel. Now, as a mother myself, I can't imagine, or I can imagine what my parents were going through at that time. What led them to make this hard decision of leaving their home, leaving everything behind, starting a new life in a completely different country. But it happened. We were there for 6 years. We attended school, my sister and I. My other sisters were older. My father enrolled my sister and I in an American school in Pakistan. We were attending, but then something happened that forced him to flee again. And that's when he applied to the United States so that we could come here for opportunity. My sister and I were, my father was actually approached in Pakistan, telling him that get your daughters out of the school, otherwise we're going to throw acid on their faces. And so this was, again, we were not safe in Pakistan. And because of that, my father had to, again, make the decision and applied, and we became 2nd-time refugees here in the United States. And the rest is history. We could not be grateful for the opportunities we received in the United States. Although life was hard, it was a major culture clash, particularly for my parents. But we had to do what we had to do. When you're a refugee, you don't choose to go, you're forced to flee. And I think when this nation welcomed us in 1988, at that time I didn't realize, but now that I'm in the field working, I see how this nation is built of refugees, of immigrants, whether they chose to come in the 1700s, or whether they were forced to come here, or whether we were forced to flee our nations and conflict and come to the United States. We are a big, massive group of immigrants through history in the United States. And that's what kind of makes me feel like I am part of this fabric now. As a 9-year-old, obviously there was culture shock, but I lived. In school, initially it was difficult. I didn't know the language. I didn't know how people dressed. And American life. I was elected class treasurer in high school, and that's a big deal. Class treasurer, class president 2 years in a row. So I lived a very normal American life. I went to the movies, volunteered, applied for college, did college tours. Anything that a normal American kid would do, I did in my high school. I applied, I went to James Madison my first year, and back then within the Afghan community, it was not every Afghan girl could go away for college. Yes, we were pro-education, but we were not really pro going and living on campus. So the decision that my father made, that we made, it was a big deal to us. So I did. I went to Harrisonburg, lived there for 1 year, and realized I was homesick, and I cried with my mom on the phone every single night for 9 months. And so I transferred to George Mason, and I finished at George Mason University. So through my high school years and my younger years, as I was bullied, to me, it was nothing more than, these are just young kids, and we're all mean to each other, and that's how it is. So the bullying didn't really affect me that much, and I had a really close relationship with my sisters and my parents at home. So at school, I was bullied. I'd come home and just live a normal life, do my homework and do everything else. But it was not until I was at George Mason University where my identity as an American, Afghan American, and a Muslim American was tested. And that's because when I transferred to George Mason, I decided to wear the hijab, the headscarf. And it was on 9/11, I was in my class, not knowing, like I had a 7:30 class, it lasted until 9:30. I had no idea what was happening in the United States at that time. I left my class on my way to the admissions office, and this girl just approaches me out of nowhere and starts yelling at me. She's like, "It's all because of you." And her words just keep circling in my head. And I was like, what? Because of like some completely random tells me this, and I continue about my day. I go to the admissions office. Once I go there, everybody's crowded around a small TV. And there's just a big line of students. And that's when I found out that the Twin Towers were attacked. Then it all made sense. Why was I yelled at for absolutely no reason on the news? The words of Bin Laden, that his name was getting mentioned. Al-Qaeda kept getting mentioned, and I was like, oh, I made the connection right away. That was the very first time in my life as an American, as a refugee in the United States, that I started questioning, am I really accepted in this country? Yeah, so that was, again, the whole rhetoric happened. I was still hijabi at that time, and I went grocery shopping for my mom. At the grocery stores, I literally had women like back off a little bit when that happened. And I couldn't do anything but to smile, because that's all I could do, to give them the assurance that I'm safe, I'm not here to harm you, I'm just like you, I'm trying to make a living just like you are, I'm a student. So those were the experiences I had post 9/11, right after 9/11. Many sides. But knowing myself and knowing the resilience of an immigrant, I just knew that I'm not going to let that stop me from living and stop me from going out and being myself. So I kind of took that whole experience as a blessing in disguise. I used the opportunity to teach. I went around different classes. I was part of the Afghan Student Union at George Mason. I was also part of the Muslim Student Association. So what we did was we decided to educate students on campus about Islam, about Afghans, about Muslims in general. So we'd set up vendors. We'd go and speak to different, courses, classes. The professors would invite us and we'd speak. And then we also volunteered, not only in mosques, but local, homeless shelters and everywhere else. Just to, I can't believe I had to do all this. I wanted to do all this, but I felt like I was doing it just to prove that I'm safe. But again, that whole experience just made me learn more about others and gave me the opportunity to teach others about myself. So that was my experience back as a college student. Then you fast forward to my married life. In 2004, I finished college. Then I got married. My husband's sitting right here. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but there's a reason. So we have blessed with 3 children. And again, as I mentioned, now I was not a student anymore. I was not just me, but I was a mother raising American Muslim children in the United States post 9/11. So there were choices we had to make. Do we want to send our kids to regular schools? Do we want to, how do I want to raise them? Do I want to raise them Muslims? Do I want to raise them proud Muslims? Do I want to, tell them about their Afghan identity? So these were a lot of decisions my husband and I had to make regarding, raising our children. And we wanted to make sure all at the same time that we're protecting them and that we're raising them to be proud of who they are, regardless of what environment they're growing up in. And all this time I'm thinking we are in Northern Virginia, the most diverse, one of the most diverse areas of the United States, and that will be accepted and that will be fine until fast forward back to 2015, what I shared happened and I was like, okay, I need to step up. And that's when we had that event. And so what we did with our children was they joined the first Muslim choir group in the United States. This is the only choir group by Adams Center. It's a local mosque in Loudoun County. Through that choir group, they were able to go sing at the National Cathedral with the choir group there. They were singing at local synagogues. They were singing at local mosques, at every single event at the Dr. Martin Luther King event every January. They were singing. So this gave the children an opportunity to go around and learn about other religions and other faiths and learn our commonalities. One of the most important events in my children's life and ours and everybody is there was an Ashburn school, like it's a school, a historic building. It was a black school back in, a while back it was, but they've kept it as a historic building. That school was vandalized by a group of students. And their choir group, along with a whole lot of other interfaith groups, we came together and they decided to wash the school and clean it. And my kids still talk about it. We all circled around the school and everybody held hands and we prayed together. And we prayed together to the one God. It was Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and we had Sikhs, interfaith. And my kids still talk about that experience. So we tried our best to make sure that our children are raised loving people of other faith, appreciating people of other faith. And in return, what we saw was that people of other faith were also coming together and willing to learn about us. So this became like a very, very enriching experience for all of us. And why do I share this today? I share this because through this event, the Meet Your Muslim Neighbor event, the impact that it had in our lives and in the life of others was immense. That event opened up doors to friendships that I've made that have lasted till today, and that some of the women who are Christian, white women, reached out to me and they wanted to meet with me. This is after the event. We finally met at coffee shops, those who couldn't attend the event. But it reached a point where in 2019, I was diagnosed with kidney disease. And it was stage 4. I was on dialysis and I needed a donor. 3 women out of that group that I met offered their kidney to me. And none of them were Muslim. And these are the women I met through that one event. So I get goosebumps talking about this. But this is the power of building bridges. This is the power of stepping out there and offering who you are and giving somebody an opportunity to get to know you. And you using that opportunity to get to know them. So these are the type of friendships that were built out of that event. My kidney disease, obviously, was aggressive. None of them ended up being a match for me, so my sister gave her kidney, and I'm alive today thanks to everybody's prayers and my sister, but I am able to speak with you today because I got my transplant in 2020. In 2020, towards the end of 2020, another opportunity came about. And by now, while I'm in bed. I was hospitalized 2-3 times, very near-death situations. But through that time, through that experience, I kept questioning, what is my purpose on this earth? You know, what am I chasing? What was I chasing? What is it that I want? And the only thing that makes sense to me was, you know what? I'm a human being. I should say, like, serve my life, live my life in service of others. What that service was, I didn't know. And so when I got a lease at my life, when I got my kidney, I just had a talk with God. One day I was laying in bed. I was like, what do I want to do with my life when I get out of this hospital? And I decided I'm going to live my life in service. This is the second chance at life that I have. I want to be there for every human out there, regardless of their background. I'm a human. God wants me to serve, and that's what I'm going to do. And what is it? Lo and behold, God throws an opportunity at me at the acting. I initially, CBS was working with, I can't speak today, I'm sorry, with Warner Brothers. They were working on a series called United States of Al, and you're not wrong. A lot of people have said AI because it's A and then that L, and yeah, it's Al. Yeah. They're working on a series called United States of Al, which was a story based on an immigrant from Afghanistan who was a SIV. He helped the United States Marines in Afghanistan, and they become best friends because he saves the Marines' life. And he comes and, strategically located in Ohio, of all the places, trying to navigate his life as an Afghan immigrant in Ohio. So they needed a woman in her 40s to portray his mom. And the mom had to be from Kandahar and speak the language. And I just happened to fit that whole description of the mother. Gulbashra was her name, Al's mom. And when I saw the flyer, and one of my cousins who lives in California, she's like, can one of you please audition? I mean, I had no desire to ever act. No, never in my life would I think I'm going to go to Hollywood. So I asked my sisters because I thought they fit the description better than I did. And I was like, can you guys do this? And one of them is camera shy. The other one thinks, she thought I was crazy. So then I complained to my husband. I'm like, these ladies are crazy. They're not doing it. And he's like, why don't you do it? And I was like, I have no desire. I don't know how to act. First, my language skills are not as good as my sisters because they grew up in Afghanistan. I was too young when I left. Second, I am not an actress. He's like, just give it a try. And then I have 3 sons who also pushed me. They all pushed me to audition. And I did it just for fun. I was like, let's just do this audition. It'll be a nice family thing. But I did not know Chuck Lorre liked me. He said, he was like, and Chuck Lorre is the executive producer of, what is that? Big Bang Theory. So he's like, I like the lady from Virginia, and I was the lady from Virginia. So they chose the lady from Virginia, and I ended up going there. And just that whole experience was surreal. We drove in the middle of a pandemic. I was not vaccinated at that time. We couldn't fly. So my husband drove me across the country just to do 2-3 episodes all at once. And the whole experience, again, it was something out of my norm, out of my world. But it happened. We did what we had to do, and we came back. A week before the episode aired that I was in, I sat there, and I guess my jitters came, and I was like, what is this? Why did I do this? And I talked to my husband about it, like, what was this whole experience about? And then it just occurred to me that when I was in middle school, I represented my nation because we used to have international weeks. And I got up there in my Afghan clothes. And as soon as I got up on stage to walk across, a whole lot of laughter happened. And these were my bullies. They all laughed at me, at what I was wearing, at who I was. And although I was taken aback, I stood there on stage while the students were laughing at me. I was in tears. I had a decision to make. I either go with it or run off the stage, but I went with it. So I did that, and that memory just came back to me a week before my episode aired. And then that's when I was like, okay, so I was on stage for an auditorium maybe of 500 students, 600 students. Now I'm going to be aired, and United States of Al had a viewing of about 5 million viewership every week. So I was representing my language, my Afghan woman, an Afghan mother to an audience of 5 million on CBS, on national TV. And that's when I said, that's my service. That's when I was like, God gave me this opportunity to serve. And service is, yes, it's not just, going and serving food or volunteering at a homeless shelter, but to opening minds, to representing my nation, my culture, my women to a vast audience. And CBS, the CBS audience is, from what I've learned, a little bit on the bias side. So for me to go in an Afghan woman's garment and speak my language, in a time where Hollywood has always villainized Muslims and villainized Afghans, for me to use this opportunity and educate people and showcase an Afghan mother in a positive light, I was like, I think I got my calling. That is service on my part. So that's what I got from my acting. And I know you asked me earlier if I'm pursuing other opportunities. And I said, yes, I'd love to act again, but I want to make sure that it's my representation in a positive light. I don't want to be shown as that oppressed Muslim woman. Not all of us are oppressed. Our religion does not oppress us. The men do in our cultures, but not the religion. I want to also make sure that my role is not that of a villain. I don't wish ill on anybody. Neither do the Afghan women, neither do Afghan mothers. They all raise their children. No mother wishes their child to do bad. It's our society, our culture, our political climate that changes people. But I wanted to show the people that we are human, just like everyone else. The Muslims are not villains. Afghans are not villains. Pashtun. So I feel like I've been fighting my identity. Like I go from a Muslim, well, a woman. As women, we fight a lot for our identity. Then there's being a Muslim woman. Then there's being an Afghan woman. And then there's being a Pashtun woman. Because if you guys know, majority of the Taliban, unfortunately, are Pashtun. And the whole Pashtun tribe is villainized because of the doing of politics. So I've always found myself fighting for my identity. But I fight through service because I want people to know that we are human and that we serve just like everyone else. We also, through that time, I started organizing a group, and I worked with USIP to find a group called Loudon Kids for Peace. My children were involved. It unfortunately didn't evolve much because of COVID. A lot happened. The group kind of, died down. But the fact is that we do everything we can in our power to make sure that we build bridges, because I believe that when you build bridges, you create understanding. And I think that's what we need more right now, more than anything else. Sorry, I just forgot about my note cards. In 2021 was the historic withdrawal of the United States troops in Afghanistan. August, I believe we all saw images of Afghanistan and that infamous plane where people were hanging from them. It's a traumatic image that has stayed in the minds of so many people. When these Afghans decided to escape at the fall of Kabul to Taliban, immediately we knew that they were all going to be bringing them in the thousands. And where we live very close to Dulles Airport, and we found out that majority of them were going to come through Dulles Airport. So our house became a hub for collecting diapers and bottles and clothes and everything for these refugees that were coming. It's so nice. I like that.
10 minutes.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll get louder. I like it. So what happened was we were volunteers. So at Dulles Airport, if they needed bottles, we need 20 bottles for these Afghan kids. My husband would run and drop them off. So our house became like a hub for collecting all sorts of donations. And again, this became a community event and another calling, serve. So these opportunities kept coming in, and me being an former Afghan refugee myself, and knew how difficult it was. But knowing that we were welcomed by, I don't remember which resettlement agency, but the fact is that they were wonderful and they made us feel at home. I wanted to make sure that I offered that opportunity to the newly arrived Afghans. So through that, I basically, I volunteered, and then LIRS, or now Global Refuge, reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to be a case manager. I'd never done case management in my life as a social worker. It takes a lot. But I don't know, so I was just dropped in the ocean and said, okay, learn how to swim, become a case manager, because you need to help these Afghans out. And that's what I did. I became a case manager. We resettled over 1,400 people in the Alexandria area. And yeah, that's what we did. And now I find myself working in resettlement. and I love it. And again, it's my calling, and I feel like God keeps giving me opportunities to serve. And through the service, what I've found is by sharing the stories of refugees, by sharing, my own story, how we came, what we were, and where I am today, and by sharing that, okay, I am just an everyday American, just like everybody else, did the education, work, I pay taxes. We contribute to the economy here. A lot of things that you hear is refugees are taking away our jobs, refugees are taking away our money. That's not true. In fact, refugees and immigrants pay billions and billions of dollars in taxes towards this economy. So these are the kind of things I do out there. I try to change people's thinking about immigrants, people thinking about refugees. So yeah, that's what it was. And I found myself going around the country with Global Refuge, places like Ohio, places like very remote areas in the United States, sharing my experiences and opening people's eyes. And I just want to read, I had to write an abstract, but I want to read this and then I'll end it. My vision for the United States is that this vision calls for an America where every newcomer is embraced as part of the national story, where communities come together to uplift immigrant families, and where cultural representation reflects the full richness of who we are. I imagine a country where immigrants are celebrated on larger platforms, including Hollywood, where Muslims, Afghans, and other underrepresented communities appear not as stereotypes or villains, but as integral threads in the American fabric. My vision for America is rooted in gratitude and lived experience. As a refugee welcomed to the United States in the 80s, I witnessed firsthand how safety, opportunity, and community can transform a life. Since then, I have seen generations of refugees and immigrants arrive with the same hopes, seeking stability, dignity, and the chance to contribute to a nation they admire. Growing up in Northern Virginia, being American became inseparable from my Afghan identity, shaping how I understand belonging and how I imagine our shared values. United States 250 can be a turning point, a moment to reaffirm who we want to be. By expanding representation, fostering understanding across communities, and championing leaders who elevate compassion over division, we can build a nation where every individual feels seen, valued, and welcomed. This is the America I believe in and the America I hope to help shape by building bridges. That's it.
Thank you. I actually think that the bells were doing you some good there. It was kind of like building momentum. Thank you for, we've had 3 great bridges. So I love this metaphor of building bridges that we continue to work on. Before I introduce our next speaker, our last speaker, I want to tell you that we will have a discussion at the end, and I hope that you can stick around. The last speaker we have is a person that I've known in the museum world in and around our cultural spaces, Dr. Izetta Mobley. Izetta I have known to be one of the most curious people I have ever known. She is interested in almost everything. And she has also challenged my thinking in a lot of different regards. And that's a really valuable service that you provide, Izetta. I'm going to shorten your bio just a tad, but Dr. Mobley is a native Washingtonian and a graduate of Brown University. She received her doctorate in American Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park, not too far away. As a cultural historian, Dr. Mobley's research focuses on gender, race, disability. See, listen to this. Gender, race, disability, medicine, public history, material, visual culture, digital humanities. Do we leave out anything? Probably feminism and all these other things. Her research explores how race, slavery, and disability are enmeshed in the Atlantic world. Dr. Mobley has extensive experience within the cultural sector, having worked in TEDx, Shakespeare Theater, Woolly Mammoth Theater, Institute for Museum and Library Services, National Endowment for the Arts, Humanities, DC, the Office of Historic Alexandria, Smithsonian National Museum of American Art, and the DC History Conference, for which she served as a co-chair and project manager. A lifelong learner, for sure, and teacher, she has received numerous fellowships and taught courses in visual culture, race, cities, and disability in her academic career. She's appeared on National Public Radio, She is a co-author of Work in the Intersections, a Black Feminist Disability Framework. It's a good read. And Dr. Mobley served as the Director of Interpretation and Collections and Education at the Reginald Lewis Museum in Maryland, African American History and Culture. She is currently an independent curator and scholar focusing on museums, public history, trauma-informed care, and approaches and disability access. And she is also the founder of Sight Unseen, which provides tours. I bet your tours are amazing. Please welcome Izetta Mobley.
Good afternoon. Oh, wait, one more time, please. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You know, I am a native Washingtonian, and contrary to popular belief, DC is well below the Mason-Dixon line, so we tend towards Southern behavior. Thank you so much to Cameron, to Callie, to the entire Lincoln Cottage staff and volunteers. Hi, Mr. Kilborn. It's so lovely to see you. This is my high school history teacher who got me through AP US History and is largely why I'm a historian. He's joined here by Dr. Davis, who, when I said, I think if more women were in charge, there'd be less war, he told me to go read about Catherine the Great. And both white men who generously allowed me to constantly push back on the narrative of America, for which I am quite grateful. From here I saw and I cried, grief, mourning, and critical historical imagination for new ways forward. How might you document a nation's journey toward a more perfect union? What visual language would best capture the turmoil and challenges presented to a president presiding over a civil war? How might that president and nation attempt to, as Lincoln said, re-adopt the Declaration of Independence? Lincoln understood his purpose as president as revisiting the promises made upon the nation's founding. He believed that he had a duty to continually recommit to the idealized notions of liberty put forth in 1776. Lincoln reasoned that if we aligned ourselves to that original declaration, we shall not only have saved the Union, but we shall have so saved it as to make and to keep it forever worthy of the saving. As we commemorate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States, how might the questions raised through linked images of Abraham Lincoln at the pinnacle of his work to make the Union worthy by keeping it whole, and from the artist Carrie Mae Weems, direct us to attend to the unfinished business of the promises of the nation's founding? I often find myself drawn to the evocative labor of photography, and while photography, developed in 1839, arrived more than 60 years too late to capture the events of 1776, so much of how I see the nation has been informed by iconic images. Photography is unique in the power of its visual language to capture and convey moments in time and history. For nearly 200 years, photography has documented critical moments of grief, longing, justice, joy, terror, and hope. A photograph might capture what we can never see in the present moment. The expanse of land Abraham Lincoln would have seen here in the days before he died, for instance, or a cracked glass transferred photograph image of a president taken 2 months before his assassination, or the reinterpretation by artist Carrie Mae Weems of images taken by a eugenicist in the mid-19th century, reimagined to affirm dignity and freedom in the 1995 photography series, From Here I Saw What Happened and Cried. How might our looking with care, precision, with compassion, and with a sense of how history, grief, and mourning echo across time serve to convey meanings about the unfinished business of this American project? Where and how do we locate and attend to grief in history? How might parallel moments in history or parallel photographic representations and histories lead us to more thoughtfully consider and imagine ways towards something akin to justice? How does true attention to the human experience of grief through authentic mourning allow us to create futures that are more radically oriented toward equity? What strikes me about the two photographs I'm centering today, an image of Abraham Lincoln taken by Alexander Gardner 2 months before he died, with a crack in the glass negative, and artist Carrie Mae Weems' reuse and veil photographs for Louis Agassiz, is the way that mourning and grief haunt the images. Both of these representations, one of an admired president killed before he could serve his second term, and the other an artist standing witness to the brutal realities of slavery in the United States that make the promise of all men are created equal rather hollow, force us to contend with mourning. Lore about the prescience of the Gardner image of Lincoln has circulated since 1865. Gardner was a protege of celebrated Civil War photographer Matthew Brady. Lincoln sat for the photograph at their 7th Street studio on February 5, 1865. During the production of the photograph, done with a glass plate transfer, the plate cracked as Gardner applied the emulsion that would develop the image. Because of the damage, he threw the plate away. What remains is a singular image of Lincoln at the end of the Civil War, aged, haunted, solemn, having nearly accomplished the task of keeping the Union together, at least on the page, if not fully in practice, as we would come to learn. Here is the power of photography. The instant seems like a reading of the future. The angle of the crack in the glass is a disturbing mirror of where Lincoln would be shot. We can imagine that perhaps this Lincoln is wary, but also looking forward to the hard work of rebuilding a nation after Civil War, and yet we know that moment was never to come. Carrie Mae Weems' work, and From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried, functions as a disruption of the trope of nostalgic longing and amnesia for the antebellum period. Created between 1995 and 1996, the photograph series contains 33 toned prints and features images that originated in Harvard University's archives and a collection compiled by Louis Agassiz. In her work, Weems purposely shields the exploited subjects in these images. Images taken by John Zealy on a South Carolina plantation of an enslaved Black family. Some of you may be following this case. The family sued Harvard University and has received the rights back to these photographs, actually. But Agassiz's purpose in taking these images was to use these photographs to prove his theory of polygenesis, which is essentially a theory that we as humans all have different ancestors based on our supposed racial differences. And Agassiz proffered and offered this idea that people of color were descended from lesser animals or lesser beings. So he wanted to prove that through what is often called phrenology, which was a 19th century ideal about how your shape of your head was. So scientific. Through the use of saturated color, visual framing, and text, Weems both exposes and usurps the white eugenicist gaze that has informed this photographic gaze of Agassiz. The title of Weems' series, From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried, inspired the topic and title of my talk today. The title serves as a temporal reference. Who, after all, is the subject who has seen what is happening and cried? Today, I think many of us are seeing what is happening are in some form of mourning. In a grammatical sense, I saw what happened and I cried is modified by the phrase from here, which suggests a distance of both time and place. Viewers are intended to understand the phrase from here to mean that the speaker sees and cries from the contemporary moment. Scholar Christina Sharp observes that grammar itself tells a story of Blackness, rendering new arrangements and meanings. Sharp argues for Blackness as a temporal in and out of place and time, putting pressure on meaning and that against which meaning is made. Weems' title reflects Sharp's sense of anagrammatical Blackness, a Blackness that creates new meanings and upturns our sense of time. Weems's intervention via the photographic gaze shows us the power of photography to help us travel between time and to confront the visual underpinnings of a given moment. Or, another way to put it, is that Weems's work travels and echoes through time and captures the particular grief of slavery in a country often lauded by its own mythology of being free. Weems's photographic revisionism and From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried intervenes on Agassiz' eugenicist gaze. Weems has made it impossible to look with ease upon the bodies of Renty and Delia. The jarring optic engagement Weems utilizes is a literal moment of seeing red in the face of racism, as the viewer witnesses Agassiz' dehumanization of Renty and Delia, and as viewers consider their own participation in looking. Weems uses a medium often associated with the temporal to both highlight and then disrupt oppressive uses of time, and in so doing, reminds us that grieving often transcends time. Rather than Renty and Delia remaining in stasis, frozen forever in a moment of exploitation and dehumanization, Weems's redirected gaze serves as a kind of escape valve from the position of permanently exploited Negro type. When artists, scholars, and theorists intervene on photographs in this way, there's an opportunity for insurgent reframings of historic images. Weems marshals a visual grammar that spotlights the social and cultural labor of Black bodies in the photographic medium. The red gel, like a blood barrier, so to speak, not only prevents an unencumbered consumption of the image, but it also serves as a signal to the viewer of being out of time. It suggests that the mourning for slavery may have no end. The Lincoln image, like the Weems series, captures anticipatory and complex grief, moments where an unknown future or unknown suffering is both present and also on the way. What I'd like to invite us to explore today is thinking through how attending to the very human experience of grief and authentic mourning might better ground us in a complex truth that in turn might allow us to create more radically equitable futures. The uneasy gift of grieving is how rapidly it forces us to shed what we can no longer tolerate. Grief is understood as universal, an experience that many of us would prefer to avoid or escape, but which we simply cannot. Eventually, we all mourn. As we sit in this room today, we are sharing space in a home in which Mary and Abraham Lincoln grieved. and they did so with others across the country. If you pause for a moment at the foot of the stair, you might catch a glimpse of the Capitol and an echo of the landscape that Lincoln might have gazed upon as he considered war and its impacts and mourned the country's compounding losses and his own unspeakable loss of a child. I think an argument can be made that one of the most unmet and unacknowledged needs of our nation is the unfinished project of mourning. If you don't properly mourn, you cannot also then move to the profound actions of justice which accountability and repair require. For me, America 250 is not and could not be a celebration. It is a commemoration. It is a revisiting to see if, as Lincoln suggested, we have worked toward the ideals of the nation with such consistent purpose that we have perfected it and perhaps in the process maybe even made it more worthy. Because we must be truthful. The creation of this nation in 1776 was also an apocalypse. Yes, there were deaths from the American Revolution, but I am talking about the apocalypse of losing your ancestral land, your family, and your way of being in the world. I am talking about the Armageddon of sharks following ships transporting African people across the Atlantic so that they could feed on those thrown overboard. I am trying to excavate the grave dirt that makes up the very foundation of this country. I am pushing us to do this because without proper mourning and grieving, we cannot imagine or create more equitable futures. Existence. We cannot properly document the complexities of our lives, and we cannot use critical imagination to flourish or if we do not stand ready to be present to all the ways we have failed or lost or yearned or harmed, we can't move forward. Equitable futures in this country must be based on complex, nuanced, and comprehensive understandings of how this nation came to be. The Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies identifies symptoms of complex grief as usually accompanied by insistent thoughts or images of the deceased and a sense of disbelief or an inability to accept the painful reality. Our iconography of the nation captures heart-rending moments of grief. We memorialize, but neglect to reach the next step of repair. Complex grief in some ways parallels complex PTSD. Like complex PTSD, complications of complicated grief can include behaviors such as excessive avoidance, difficulty regulating emotions, or developing problems such as addictions or exasperating existing conditions like obsessions or feelings of isolation. At the DuPont Circle Metro, a quote from poet Walt Whitman encircles the escalator. It reads, in part, "Some suffer so much. I recall the experience, sweet and sad." The words come from the poem The Wound Dresser, in which Whitman laments the staggering loss of life he witnessed during the Civil War. It is a quote deeply rooted in mourning. I read it now in the month of April, a month in which the U.S. has had a long list of historic moments of grief. April, perhaps incongruently, is a powerful month in which to observe the complex grieving we simultaneously experience and refuse. As a historian, I am intrigued by the sheer number of historic events occasioning mourning that occur in April. A survey of historic events reveal a litany of grief. On April 9, 1865, the surrender of the Confederate Army at Appomattox. Lincoln's assassination. Ponce de Leon arrives in Florida and decimates indigenous communities on April 2, 1513. On April 2, 1900, the United States imposes limited self-rule for Puerto Rico in its continuing colonial efforts. Pocahontas marries John Ralph as a child on April 5, 1614, only to die in England alone and separated from her people. On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated at the Lorraine Motel. On April 11, 1865, Lincoln makes his last public speech. On April 12, 1743, Thomas Jefferson, who will later impregnate Sally Hemings when she is a teenager, is born. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln is shot at Ford Theater. On April 16, 1862, enslaved African Americans in the District of Columbia are freed, and reparations are paid to the people who enslaved them. On April 15th, Lincoln dies from his wounds. On April 11th, 1945, American forces liberate the Buchenwald concentration camp and see what horrors have occurred in the name of race science, and Jim Crow, which were models used by the Nazis in their fascist, race-based state. On April 16, 2007, the largest mass shooting to date at that time occurs at Virginia Tech. On April 17, 1861, Virginia secedes from the Union. On April 17, 1965, Ellis Island processes nearly 12,000 more people than at any other time in history. On April 18, 1906, a horrifying earthquake hits San Francisco. On April 17, 1961, the United States attempts an illegal coup attempt on Fidel Castro, known as the Bay of Pigs. On April 19, 1993, cult leader David Koresh is fortified with his followers in Waco, Texas, when a full-scale armed conflict erupts, ending the Waco siege. On April 20th, 1999, 2 students at a Colorado high school murder their classmates in a mass shooting. On April 20th, 2010, an explosion in the Gulf of Mexico causes a deep water horizon, which leads to an oil leakage that forever changes the ecology of the region. On April 23rd, 1985, New Coke is introduced. On April 26, 1607, land speculators and colonizers make landfall in Jamestown, Virginia. On April 27, 2006, construction begins on Freedom Tower, the soaring building that replaces the World Trade Center. On April 27, 1861, Lincoln suspends habeas corpus. On April 12, 1983, Margaret Heckler, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, tells Congress that no additional funding is needed to research HIV. The first polio vaccine arrives at the Mayo Clinic on April 3, 1955. In April 1866, an order is issued to clean Manhattan because of a virulent cholera outbreak that killed thousands. In April 1804, Sacagawea sets off with the Corps of Discovery and what becomes known as the Lewis and Clark Expedition. On April 10, 2020, the U.S. becomes the country with the most COVID-19 cases and deaths, surpassing Italy and Spain. There is anguish here in this recitation, moments of fracture and mourning that sometimes pushed us to create more justice and sometimes simply seduced us into retrenchment. Commemoration is not enough. It is not enough if we do not do work to actively repair. That is how I understand Lincoln's quote. We shall not only have saved the Union, but we shall have so saved it as to make and to keep it forever worthy of the saving. To me, Lincoln could be talking about justice, about repair, of the continuing revisiting of our grief so that we do not return to the source of the conditions that have created such mighty mourning and loss. What must happen? What could happen beyond commemoration? Without mourning, we cannot fully identify what it is that we know we have lost. And I know I certainly mourn of my dear friend, Dr. Tatiana K. Benjamin, the shrinking margins of my family of origin, the 6 years of COVID cautiousness that have sometimes led to deep isolation as I stand in solidarity with the principles of disability justice. In April 2026, we are in the midst of commemorating America 250. We are also, perhaps right now, mourning the eclipse of democracy, citizenship, and what we've known of the U.S. empire. When we mourn, we lament the loss of the way we thought life and living would be, could be, or should have been. Attending to our grief authentically does not make us broken or weak, but rather it makes us less fragile to the complexities of living. What a profound historical echo to find that we yet again are contemplating what precisely a more perfect union might entail. Thank you.
Thank you, Izetta. Izetta, I have one question for you. When you say authentic grieving, do you want to tell us what that means?
I know that's really tricky because the word authentic doesn't really capture with precision what that could mean. I think that we do a lot of performative grieving, which is that, and it's become a meme on Twitter, it will forever be Twitter. Thoughts and prayers, but that is performative in the way that we don't sit with the grief. And we will do things like, people will rush in and say, I can't even focus today. But we won't say, I can't focus today because we're currently seeing a war throughout Lebanon, Iran, and I'm worried about the well-being of my family, or I'm worried about the assault on people I love. So that there's this acknowledgement, but it's not a full acknowledgement of what is contributing to that sense of dissociation or despondency or confusion or overwhelm. We just take these moments to say something, but we do not actively grieve. So I mean authentic mourning and applause, just as we did today, where I'm literally talking you through all of the things that have happened and giving us space to absorb that.
So space and time, yeah, that does for the feel, to actually feel it and not just graze it. Yeah, but it's a vulnerable act, right? And as many of the stories here were today, vulnerable acts in really coming forward, because I just want to acknowledge that everybody who told their story today, they are storytellers, they are educators, and not everybody's built for that. Not everybody that comes with a certain identity or a certain lived experience is built for that kind of, opening up and finding those moments to talk with people. So we really appreciate everybody's vulnerability today. So I want to open this up to you all today at this last moment. You've had a lot to digest. We heard from Monty joining us from a federal penitentiary, not federal, state penitentiary, talking about his experience of incarceration. We had Angelina Johnson asking us to, center joy from her perspective as a young adult. and a social justice advocate. And we have Zarmina Hamidi is asking us to look at look at our get to know our Muslim neighbors, right? And ask ourselves questions about what we don't know. And then we had Izetta Mobley asking us to consider grief and past harms as a way of moving forward. So those are a lot of different stories. How is all of this sitting with you right now? Are you, and this is of course related to the vision of America and what you think of being American and where we're going with it. How do these stories inform your thoughts on America? And anybody is free if you want to raise your hand and yeah.
We're going to use the mic.
Oh, mic. Okay, yes, right. So we can hear it on YouTube or whatever we're doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sherry Mueller with the School of International Service at American University. I want to say a big thank you for this moment and ask each of our panelists or speakers if they would be kind enough to give a couple of practical resources for action that we can do. For example, when I was listening to Zarmina, I was thinking of Unity Productions and those incredible documentary PBS films on the Islam faith and Muhammad, Legacy of a Prophet. So that would be an example from you of something we can do to broaden our horizons beyond today. And I would just ask that of each of our speakers. And thank you.
Just in the interest of time and making sure other people can get their comments in, I will ask if anything comes to mind for y'all. I don't want to put you on the spot for each person, but if anything comes to mind for further reading. Oh, and Monty's on the phone. Okay, right. So Monty or any of the speakers, any further reading? Give us some homework.
I'll share a book, Rest is Resistance. It's called Rest is Resistance, a manifesto, if you haven't read it. She's talking about rest, but it's related.
Correctional Facility.
Tricia Hersey?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great one. Okay.
What was it?
Rest is Resistance. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask answer the first question, which is, how does this thing go?
It's not actually for amplification, it's just recording.
Okay.
Or it's like,
I feel very rooted and grounded because the weight of what was mentioned also makes me feel like a desire to slow down. And I'm just really grateful for that. I think it's hard for me, anybody else who has questions, I'm very impressed. So I feel like I need a bit of time to really let this sink in. And also the beauty of these interlocking stories, I think, will unfold a little bit because they're so distinct, but yet you've curated such a beautiful selection for us. So just really feeling solidly in this place right now. So thank you.
so you're really in the present. It makes you want to slow down. Interesting. Yeah, and I think a lot of there's some echoes of that throughout several of these presentations. Monty, I want to ask you if you want to add anything so far.
There will be a little bit of a delay.
Yes, absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I'm sorry too, if somebody has a question, it'll probably have to be repeated into the very muffled. But one thing I wanted to say is, well, thank you for our limitations and what we have to do for me to speak. I got cut off kind of before I was able to make the final point. And one thing I wanted to say is that I can't give you my vision, Erica, at 2:50 because we haven't arrived. We're still not. But remaining hopeful, I think that I'd like everybody to try for a second to just imagine a world without, because as an abolitionist, this becomes even difficult for the prisoner. Most prisoners in here are reformers. But then somebody that's locked up can't imagine a world without prisons. But prisons and punishment, they're woven into the fabric of America's cloth. 50 years ago, back in the year of our bicentennial, a district court judge, a national conference, this was in 76, Alvin Rubin said that one phenomena of our criminal law enforcement is that the more we handle inmates, talking about judges, and the worse they become. But in the 50 years since Alvin's statement, the incarceration rate in our country has increased nearly sixfold. And in the year in our country, taken another step back, adding at least 88 new immigrant detention centers. And so we are obsessed with locking people away, and we have disregarded that there may be other ways to accountability and justice. And when I think we are the richest country on the planet, I also think that should have been just money, but I also think I wish that the people on the outside could see some of the young men incarcerated here in the North Carolina prisons, because we are failing them. As reformers, Marxists, and stagnant receipts, we know that education people from coming back to prison, but while they're here, we still don't educate. So what are we doing? Mine's really for America beyond 250 and looks more like an America where different communities, the communities on the margins, actually have access to resources and education and help and safe, because communities that have access to those things don't send their people to prison. And so my vision starts there. So abolition is tied into equality, and is that of one of equality. So we need a fundamental shift of our understanding and how we address justice, and we need access and resources in our communities. And that's what I wanted to say. And thank you for giving me the action.
Thank you so much, Monty. Yeah, we love the exercise of imagining a world without prisons. What does that look like? How else? I'm going to turn it back over to you all to kind of give us a little bit of a tapestry of some of the feelings that are coming up. But we've got like some curiosity here about wanting to learn more, and we've got some groundedness, and we're imagining a different future. What else is coming up for you folks? Yeah.
Well, as we talk about the future of this country, I'm struck by the lessons we can learn from its history in two ways that are sort of threads from all the speakers. And starting with prisons, there was a time in this country where the goal of prison was not to punish, but rather to ensure that that prisoner went back into society, never to return. So they were taught to read and write. They were given marketable skills.
North Carolina Correctional Facility.
And on Sundays, they gathered to study the Golden Rule. And the minute you introduce the for-profit for someone to make money on keeping these prisoners, which continues, that's the price you pay from losing the core principle of the common good that this country used to at least say that it was committed to, whether the public, elected officials, and religious leaders. So when you take away that commitment to the common good, you take away a commitment to making sure you don't have for-profit prisons, for-profit hospitals, for-profit schools, and people making lots and lots of money on war. And that's a common thread I see here, but the one most poignant with the prisons, because what he has contributed to other forms here is beyond description of how grateful I am to him and what he's doing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so I see some nodding heads, people resonating with the idea of the incentive of profit. So I appreciate that. Yeah, do you want to say? Okay.
Sure. I was just going to point out that one of the pieces of my presentation is encouraging people to capture this very moment. So I know, Isabel, you were mentioning feeling deeply grounded in this moment or trying to think about what capturing this moment could mean or what the symbols could mean. So there are Polaroid cameras. You can take a picture on your cell phone and print it out on Bluetooth. There are directions on that table. And I encourage you to take a moment to document your time here, document the learning that you had or the thoughts that you had, to put that on the page, so to speak, through a photograph.
Yeah, we have another hand back here. I'm sorry to just throw it.
Speak into that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, is this on? This echoes what several others have said, but if there is an aftercare package, so to speak, that could come out to us shortly, it will help us ponder, because this has been so rich. But, you know, I can't help but think of my Quaker friends and the Quaker tradition right now. I just want to be still and let it settle.
That's great advice.
But I appreciate what others have said. But I really, you know, it would be great if we could have a little aftercare package.
Yeah, people are learners in this audience, so they want to learn more. That's great, you know, curiosity from here, because if this is a start for something else, that's wonderful. And the stillness is a really good, you know, you need to feel it and let it wash over you, and then tomorrow, like, think, what is settling, you know. But does anybody have any kind of, has it already translated to you in terms of a thing that you might do with this information? Has anybody thought to themselves, like, oh, maybe I will do X, Y, or Z, or try something new, or talk to somebody new? Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed the framing of it, like everyone's speaking Yeah. I enjoyed the framing of all of these speeches, particularly because as I was listening to everyone's experiences, I was reflecting on the fact that I feel like in this current political moment, my intellectual posture is often defensive. When it comes to the administration, it's like preserving the status quo, and it's never a dreaming. It's never having ridiculous thoughts about what the future could be or what we could achieve. It's simply trying to grapple onto what we have. And it makes me a little sad that we have this moment, this bicentennial, to reflect, and I haven't exercised that creative muscle and what could the future be, because I simply want to keep it the way it is. So I think the action is I need to let myself dream and yeah, be creative more.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I've talked with a lot of activists around, this idea of resistance and how centered that is in our culture for a lot of folks who are resisting what the current administration is doing. And what that does is it also gets you really addicted to the problems. You become like a problem lover instead of a dream lover. And you're not as focused on, you know what you don't want, but you don't know what you do want. You just know you don't want that. So appreciate that comment. Anybody else want to build on any of these? Yeah, Sarah, do you want to? Yeah.
I do. I want to build on what you were saying, and just that if we see a founding as a moment of deep uncertainty when any number of things could happen next, then we start to think about what the refoundings are. The end of the Civil War, for instance, is often described as a refounding of the country because it was another moment where we had to imagine what would come next. And I think we're at another moment of refounding. And it's interesting that it's happening at the 250th, but that we must exercise that muscle of imagination and hope to do so.
Okay, 60 seconds remaining.
I think that actually makes a great place to stop. What do you think? So we're going to have a refounding. We're going to workshop. This is our next program. Before we get out of here and release everybody to lunch, I want to bring Callie back up here. Callie, you have a couple things that you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say huge thank you to all of our speakers, to Angelina and Zarmina and Izetta and Monty. To you, thank you so much for joining us. I'm struck by what you said, and I'm struck by being in this room. And if you've been on a tour of the cottage before, you may have heard the story that we tell in this room, is the story of an English visitor who showed up here well past, appropriate visiting hours and found Abraham Lincoln dressed in his pajamas. And one of the first questions that Lincoln asked him, this was 1864, was, what do you think of our great country? A nation that was literally at war with itself. And what strikes me in this moment is that what Lincoln was really asking and what Lincoln was really sharing was his optimism. And it was specifically, I think, his optimism for the people. And as I've listened to all of the stories shared here today and all of your comments, I too am feeling a little bit optimistic. And I really appreciate the opportunity to learn from you all and to share this moment with everyone here today. I want to say a huge thank you to our team here at President Lincoln's Cottage, especially Cameron and Jess, Molly, Joan, Emma. I see Paul and Marta back there. Events like this are a full team effort. We are a very small and extraordinarily mighty group of people who work here. Rebecca, thank you. See Sarah Grace too. We could not do it without the help and honestly the joy of everyone who works here. And I am deeply grateful to you all for bringing that with you every single day. I think that we hear a lot from visitors that they feel that, and that is authentic, it is true, and it is part of what makes coming to work every day my own act of resistance. I want to thank you to our Team Lincoln members who are joining us here today. Team Lincoln is our membership program. I would encourage you to check it out if you're interested in becoming a part of this community. There's early access, there are discounts, there are all kinds of things. It's a great program, and honestly, just a great way to be more involved with President Lincoln's Cottage. We have lots coming up for the 250th and beyond. We have cottage conversations. We have Bourbon and Bluegrass, which is coming up May 2nd and 3rd, which is, I think we describe it as a rollicking good time. So, it truly is that. So please don't be strangers. If you find yourself needing something, chances are you can find a little bit of it here at the cottage. So thank you all for coming today. Please come back. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Guys, can I get a group shot? I want this in the background, I think.